Hey, good morning, everybody. My name is Mike Beam, and I have the pleasure of serving as the Secretary of the Kansas Department of Agriculture. I just want to kick it off and welcome you to the 5th Annual Agricultural Growth Summit. Many of you may realize that we've typically done this all on one day in one large gathering, but because of the circumstances, we're doing it virtually this year. And doing it sector by sector before we actually have the full summit. But we think this is a great opportunity to feature what needs to happen to sustain and grow feed and forage in Kansas. And so hopefully this will be an opportunity for those who are able to chime in to give us your input as we go forward. At this point, again, I'll say welcome, and I think I'll turn it over to Kim at this time. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you, Secretary Beam. Hi, everyone. My name is Kim Nuttleton, and I'm the Kansas Haymarket reporter with the Kansas Department of Agriculture, Division of Agricultural Marketing. We are so glad you have chosen to spend time with us today. We'll be focusing the next hour or so on the Kansas feed and forage sector. Kansas feed and forage production is a very important part of a very important sector to the state's agricultural economy. Kansas livestock producers are a major outlet for hay, silage, and feed grains, and they are produced within the state's borders. According to estimates prepared by the Kansas Department of Agriculture and based on the M-Plan economic data model, the forage industry in Kansas has a direct output of approximately $670.7 million and creates approximately 8,942 jobs in the state. Through indirect and induced impacts, the industry supports a total of 11,726 jobs and creates a total economic contribution of nearly $1.1 billion. The vision of our agency is to provide an ideal environment for long-term sustainable agricultural prosperity and statewide economic growth. Our summit sector sessions provide the platform to entertain opportunities and barriers to agricultural industry for our state. In this session, we will be discussing with a panel of industry specialists the views on the successes and challenges that face our industry. But before we get started, I'd like to review just a couple of housekeeping items. First of all, during the presentation portion of the webinar, all participants' microphones will be muted. If you have a question during the presentation, please submit your question using the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen. Written questions and comments will be monitored by Kansas Department of Agricultural representatives. And at any time during the webinar, when asking a question, if you would please include your name, city, and organization if applicable. Lastly, this webinar is being recorded and will be posted online. Thank you. We will start off our session with a quick poll. You will see on your screen a poll pop up, and we are asking, what role in the feed and forage industry do you represent? You'll have about 30 seconds. And then while you are taking that poll, I will actually introduce our facilitator for this panel discussion today, Ron Wilson. Ron is the director of the Huck Boyd National Institute for Rural Development at Kansas State University. He previously worked for Senator Nancy Kassebaum, the U.S. Senate Agricultural Committee, the National Council of Farmer Cooperatives, and the Farm Credit Bank in Wichita. And with that, I will turn it over to Ron and the results of our poll. Take it away, Ron.
Thank you, Kim, and good morning, everyone. Welcome to a breakfast edition of the Agricultural Growth Summit. We appreciate you joining us at this early hour on a Monday. Looks like the other category is the big winner in our poll this morning. Expected we'd see a lot of producers and some feeders. Indeed, those are well represented and along with other end users. But we have a lot of folks in the other category, so we'll be interested in hearing from you in the course of this session. So thank you for your participation. Kim Nettleton works very hard on a daily basis to make sure that we have timely and accurate Haymarket information, and she certainly worked hard to make this session as productive as possible for all of us. And so I want to thank Kim. I want to salute the Kansas Department of Agriculture, Robin Bloom, and the others who are helping make this possible. For the feed and forage session, we have an excellent list of panelists who will be speaking to us. As I look at this list of panelists, I was reminded of an example many years ago when my wife and I were helping take kids to a church activity after school, and we were all taking turns. My role was to drive this well-equipped church van. I got into this van and I was struck by two things. Number one, there were more mirrors on this van than any vehicle I'd ever seen. There was the inside, the rear view mirror, and a couple of outside mirrors, and they each had 2 or 3 extra sections of mirror pointed different directions. There was a couple of mirrors on the left front of the vehicle and one on the right side. And I got in, I was struck. I'd never seen so many mirrors. I thought, wow, there's a lot here. There's a lot to keep track of. But the second thing that struck me as I began to drive was that those mirrors, providing multiple angles and multiple perspectives, gave me more views of that van and its environs than any vehicle that I had ever driven. That the multiple angles and the multiple perspectives gave us the best possible understanding of our vehicle and our environment. And that's one of the things that strikes me about this excellent list of panelists, which Kim and the staff have pulled together today. We're going to be looking at the feed and forage industry. We all have ties to it one way or another, but slightly different perspectives. And so our goal today is to hear from these multiple perspectives so that we can have the best possible view of the feed and forage industry today, our successes, our challenges, and possible directions going forward. I'm going to introduce each of our panelists in turn. I'm going to go ahead and hold off on the questions. I'm going to go ahead and introduce each one of our panelists now, and then when we get to the questions and the subsequent discussion, we hope that can move pretty quickly. For those of you who have an agenda in front of you, I must tell you that Damien Corti is under the weather, not feeling well, so he will not be with us today. But I will introduce the other panelists one at a time. I'll introduce all of them one at a time, and then we'll turn to the questions. We'll begin with Kyle Averhoff, who is the managing partner of Royal Farms Dairy in the Garden City area where he and his family live. Royal Farms Dairy in total consists of 9,000 milking cows and 9,500 replacement heifers. That uses a lot of hay and of the feed. He previously worked with Monsanto and worked with dairymen in Southern California and Southwest Kansas. He has a BS degree from Tarleton State University in Texas, a master's from the University of Florida, and actually comes from a family dairy operation in Texas. So we're very glad to have Kyle with us and glad he's moved up to the state of Kansas. Weston Burt will be our next panelist. He's a CPA at Burton Weta and D-High Alfalfa Marketing. Weston grew up in the Larned area, currently lives in the Kansas City area. He earned a BS degree from the University of Mississippi, Ole Miss, with degrees in accounting and economics, worked with the Big Four public accounting offices in Dallas-Fort Worth, began D-High Alfalfa Marketing in 2016, and now lives with his family in the Kansas City area. Also supports the Burton Weta Company in the area of food grade business development and hemp business development. Roger Black is owner and operator of Black Farms near Arkansas City, Kansas. They raise a variety of hays, including alfalfa, brome, prairie hay. He raises cattle, some row crops, also serves as chairman for the Kansas Forage and Grassland Council, and is deeply involved in a number of watershed issues. An Oklahoma State graduate, he's been in the hay business specifically since 1982. Clayton Janicki is owner and operator of Janicki Farms in Bird City and across the border in Nebraska. Clayton has a degree from the University of Kansas in petroleum engineering. have dryland acres, but all their irrigated acres are in alfalfa. Clayton serves on several Kansas Farm Bureau committees. The Feed and Forage Advisory Group specifically represents the Northwest region on the Kansas Forage and Grassland Council Board, and most recently was appointed to the National Alfalfa and Forage Alliance Board. So I hope we'll hear some more about that. He and his family farm in the Northwest Kansas, Nebraska area. Damian Corti cannot be with us due to illness. Our final panelist will be Dusty Taha. Dusty is a rangeland management specialist with USDA, the Natural Resources Conservation Service. A native of Oakley, he attended Fort Hays State and earned BS and MS degrees in biology and specifically grassland ecology. He served USDA and RCS since 2009. In the past 8 years, has been an area range specialist in the Hutchinson area office, serving South Central and Southwestern Kansas. So as you can see, we have some excellent panelists with us today that bring a variety of perspectives on the feed and forage industry. As you'll see on your agenda, there's a couple of key questions we're going to ask each panelist. We're going to go right in the area in the order that I introduced them. Beginning with, just quickly, what do you see as a key highlight or success of the feed and forage industry? What have we done well? I'm going to start with Kyle Averhoff. Kyle, from your standpoint as a dairyman in Southwest Kansas, what are things that the feed and forage industry has done well?
Yeah, good morning. Thank you very much for the invitation to be a part of the panel here. We're approaching 20 years of being out here in Western Kansas, and I'm sure as everybody recognizes, we're on an ancient aquifer, the Ogallala, who continues to diminish. So our world kind of evolves year to year. And I think from our geography and in our business, over 50% of what we feed is roughage, and which is largely locally grown. And, I think the success is we continue to make great agronomic success and being able to do more with less water. We're having some real success raising some of our roughages for our young stock and our heifers on dryland acres, doing more during the cool season time of the year. And then with a growing livestock and dairy industry in Texas and New Mexico and the demand for alfalfa, we've had real good success in increasing our corn silage feeding rates and decreasing our alfalfa rates. Which has really been able to keep us in balance over the past 2 decades here. So always changing, but always finding a way.
Very good, Kyle. Thank you. That's good to hear. Weston Burke, you've been deeply involved in the alfalfa business and alfalfa processing, certainly. What do you see as some highlights, high points that the food and forage industry has done well?
Yeah, thanks. I guess to offer some perspective on our industry, beehive operators, we've been around since the 50s, so for over a half century. And at the peak of our industry, which was the early 60s, the late 60s, early 70s, there was probably about 700 dehydrators throughout the U.S. Today in 2020, there's probably about 7, and so there's been a tenfold decrease in the amount of producers, and so the very fact that we're still here, I think, is a testament to some of the individuals we work with. The dehy industry is tough, but despite the fact that there's so few of us left, in the last 10 years, our operations have been able to increase pellet and meal production by over 100%, and we feel like we've been able to successfully market and increase awareness around dehy alfalfa and what a great feed product it is. It's a niche product, absolutely, at least in terms of overall alfalfa production, but it's a great feed stuff. And despite the fact that there's so few of us that are in it and that are producing it, we believe that right now more individuals, feed mills, are interested in using it in their feedstuffs. And so yeah, just the fact that we're still here and doing well over that 7-year time frame.
Glad to hear you're doing well and working on the DHI products in this challenging environment. Let's go to South Central Kansas to Roger Black. Roger, you chair of the council. What do you see as strengths, highlights, successes of the feed and forage industry? Roger, you may be muted. I'm not hearing you.
Can you hear me now?
That's better, yes.
Okay. A little history. We're in South Central Kansas, in the edge of the Flint Hills, and have had family involved in the livestock business here at least since the 1870s. And it's been interesting to review day books from that era and look at the differences in the industry as we see it today versus when they started, with virtually no fences, no infrastructure, no reference over 5 years of any fence fixing, but people herded cattle. Where today, I'd say the biggest change in my experience has been in using cover crops as winter feed source and instigating some amount of rotational grazing on native grass in the summer. So our livestock program, warm season, it's native grass, cool season, generally cover crops. Big part of our business is producing alfalfa hay. Every cutting go out with the notion of making the very best hay we possibly can. Nature doesn't always cooperate. We are a rain-fed program. So finding a niche for every quality of hay we produce is a challenge, but I'd say our positive is using cover crops to reduce winter feed costs and reduce feeding days.
Thank you, Roger. Great example of a conservation practice, a management practice that producers have used wisely and effectively. Let's go to far northwest Kansas, and we'll turn to Clayton Janicki. Clayton, you're farming in the kind of the tri-state region, I guess I'd say, certainly Kansas and Nebraska.
Yeah.
What's your perspective on highlights, success stories from the feed and forage industry?
Personally, I raised alfalfa. I don't have a lot of other feed, and I actually don't have livestock personally that I feed to. So alfalfa is kind of my main focus. The ability to raise a high quality alfalfa, in spite of limited water resources for us, is a big issue. We're right on the Republican River. Just the big issues with the Republican between Kansas, Colorado, and Nebraska. The farm in Nebraska, we're allowed 11 inches of irrigation to raise our crop, and it makes it difficult. We certainly have to have help from Mother Nature, but I guess digging in and trying to figure out what it takes to raise that alfalfa at a high level, as be able to make money, I guess, while doing it. It seems like the alfalfa does a lot better job for us compared to any of the grains that we could raise right now. It beats up alfalfa or wheat, corn, milo. I mean, alfalfa just hands down is leading the way for us on the farm right now. The other thing, as far as the industry itself, the value of alfalfa, one thing that kind of surprised me, and Kim, I hope I'm not stealing some information you were going to give away here later too, was I was surprised getting into this a little bit that alfalfa is actually holds more value nationally. It's the third most valuable crop in the United States, actually edged out wheat. So I guess as a Kansas farmer, that was a bit of a surprise.
That's a surprise to me too. Thank you for sharing that. Isn't that interesting? Alfalfa as a significantly valued crop for our state. We've talked about alfalfa from a standpoint of a user, a dairyman, feeder, and processing. production. Let's turn to the grazing side. So Dusty Taha, what's your perspective as a rangeland specialist? What do you see as highlight success stories from the feed and forage industry?
Thanks, Ron. Yeah, so I guess I'll represent actual grazed forage on the hoof, and a lot of the successes I see today are actually directly tied to what I'll talk about here in a little bit, as also being some of the challenges. But having said that, one of the main challenges continues to be overstocking on native range in Kansas. And I have a list of successes here that are actually additional forage to relieve some of that pressure off of the native range. And Roger hit on this already a little bit, but you know, the movement towards cover crops in commodity crop operations is certainly relieving pressure off of native range. We're not seeing near as much you know, dormant grazing and wintering on native range because the opportunity is there to graze cover crops over the winter as well as in the summer, depending on your, you know, rotation and everything. But and a lot of that is all tied to you know, changes in cropping. The commodity crop scene is not as lucrative as it has been in the past, so that's pushing people to become innovative with cover crops. We're seeing some cropland that's actually being frankly retired completely from commodity crop production, and it's either going to strictly grazed cover crop situation where those acres are solely forage production. So I guess I would call that annually planted pasture. In the central and western part of the state, and it was talked about a little earlier, but you know, irrigated ground where wells are not producing what they used to be, and row crop is not a lucrative situation on those acres, soybeans and corn. We're seeing some of that go to annually planted pasture. We're also seeing some of it go to perennial pasture, you know, perennial cool season mixes, well, at least along the southern tier counties. See some Bermuda grass under pivot, you know, and then that's all well and good, and is being incorporated into native range grazing situations, and certainly relieving some of the strain on native range. Alongside that, expiring CRP acres, particularly you know, from 135 west, have been a significant contributor to increased and basically conversion back to grazed range. That's been good to see. Not only good to see for added forage resource, but also good to see that a lot of those acres were subprime crop ground when they were farmed, and seeing that that's not being turned back to cultivated acres. And from here moving forward, and we'll kind of see how this is going to shape out as far as how much of a contributor it's going to be. But active CRP contracts are now going to have opportunity as grazing as a regular management practice. Where I think a lot of people were familiar with CRP kind of only being cut loose by and large in the past for emergency haying and grazing operations in case of drought. You know, I think everybody's come to the full realization. It's taken a while, but everybody's come to the full realization that ungrazed native grass stands kind of tend to become stagnant and clumpy, a lot of thatch, and it's really not a healthy situation for anything. And so incorporation of cattle onto those acres is going to be good for both ends of the spectrum there. I have a lot of producers that I work with that are kind of shifting back to smaller cows, later spring calving. That's certainly helping. You know, I think there for a lot of years we were definitely on the increase in cow size. You know, and I ask everybody, how big are your cows? And they're 1,200 pounds. You know, we're out there looking around like, those are 1,500-1,600 pound cows. You know, and that's just something that's crept up over time and certainly affected you know, forage demand and effective stocking rates. Have people cow-calf operations with incorporation of yearlings into their operation, and that's been a good success when it comes to drought mitigation. You know, that's a portion of the forage demand that's disposable without digging into the herd genetics, and so that's been good to see. You know, we're seeing more and more, although this is a fairly tough road to hoe in cattle country, but multi-species grazing, particularly what comes to mind there is goats are certainly a market for that, and you look at that in the way of assisting with brush problems, invasive plant problems, sericea lespedeza. And last but not least, we're seeing and this will be tied to a challenge I'll talk about here in a little bit, but we're seeing a movement a little bit towards growing season burning, kind of getting off that you have to burn during late March through mid-April, otherwise you're not doing it right mindset. There's a lot of big time benefits to summer burning, growing season burning is what we call it, and we're seeing some people dabble in that, and that's been good to see. So that's what I have for successes.
Very good, Dusty. Great to hear a long list of successes and really excellent management practices changes that producers are making. And thanks for your good work in helping make that happen. As Dusty and some others alluded to, we're going to flip the coin here. We've been talking about successes and highlights, but we want to spend some even more time focusing on the challenges going forward. And so we're going to go back to Kyle at the top of our list. Kyle, what do you see as the top challenges facing the feed and forage industry going forward?
Yeah, thanks. As I thought about challenges, and within this group you have end users and producers and everything in between, right? So a challenge for us is an opportunity for others. So I certainly see it that way. We're all entrepreneurs in what we do. I think in our part of the world, I think largely of two challenges. One is back to managing our resource, which largely in our case is thinking about water. And when we build these operations, we think about them being here for generations and decades, and so we're very cognizant of the resource we have and how we try to continue to produce forage and crops. Between feed yards and dairies, there's some significant differences. Obviously, when you think about the inclusion of roughage in the diet, a dairy uses a much higher forage rate. I know they tend to kind of get lumped together in some cases, but they're actually dramatically different when you think about the long-term future of what forage needs are. Second is the quality difference that's really needed, in those two diets. When you're feeding 50% of a diet as forage, every pound of that largely needs to be a high-quality, digestible roughage source. So I think we spend a lot of time looking at that challenge. We're never concerned about competing with local economics of the combine and grain markets. But to tag on to that, like I say, this falls in the category of an opportunity. There's a lot of what we produce here in Kansas that can be exported, and be it in a bale of alfalfa, a bale of straw, pellets, whatever it may be. And so as we look at what we do, we try to balance where we can compete on those commodities, and then some of them they sure make sense for our farm side to grow, but not always for our dairy side to buy. We're better off to export them out to other markets. And some things that come to mind like that are crops like alfalfa in a bale. We sell alfalfa off of our farm. And then others such as straw. I think there's been a huge demand of Kansas straw to go outside of the state into the Midwest and as far as the Northeast. And that posed some challenge for us when it comes. We use straw largely as a bedding source, being open lot corrals in the winter, and it starts to really push the value as a bedding source, but not necessarily as a feed source. So one man's challenge, another man's opportunity.
That's very true. These are very much intermingled, and I appreciate you identifying those challenges. We'll move east. Weston, from your perspective, what are some of the key challenges for the feed and forage industry?
Yeah, for us as a processor, you know, we have all of the, I mean, we're set up like a feed mill. If you've ever seen a dehydrator or a dehydration plant, we've got all the costs, or most of the costs of a standard feed mill. But we don't have the benefit of selling into retail. You know, we're selling into feed mills. Feed mills are our main customers for the most part. So for us, we believe we produce a very valuable product, and there's many people that would agree. But it's vital that we maintain strong prices, and it can be tough to do. At the end of the day, it is a commodity market that we deal in, and so the markets will do what the markets will do, and we're very much tied to the price of the baled hay market, or the grinding hay market. And if prices get too low for us, you'll see exit in an already very small industry. And so it's very imperative for us internally to try and maintain and keep a strong marketing presence around the value that we add. Because if we don't, you will see exit. You know, that's a bit of an internal perspective. For many people, it's no different in their operation. Externally, we do actually have a pretty big fight in our industry right now. And I shouldn't say in our industry, I should really say there is a battle with AFCO between all of the producers, whether it's a sun-cured alfalfa producer, i.e. someone that dries in the field and then pellets, or someone that thermally processes like a dehydrator. There's a battle between us and basically one set of individuals out in Ohio. Some of you might be familiar with this, but basically their claim is the individuals in Ohio that if alfalfa is baled after it is dried in the field, it is an inferior product, which I'm sure all of you would agree is a ridiculous claim. And I invite you to call them and give them a piece of your mind if that gets you hot under the collar. And so we're actually, a bunch of us in the dehydrating and sun curing operations, alfalfa process, will be presenting to AFCO next week to explain their foolishness. So yeah, internally, we got to keep costs low, and we got to keep prices high. Typical business. Externally, yeah, we've got to fight for what does it mean to produce either sun-cured alfalfa or dehy alfalfa. So yeah, from both angles, it's things are always interesting.
Thanks, Weston. That's a wild one. Unthinkable that baled hay is sun-cured baled hay is not a quality product. Roger Black, from your standpoint, what are some of the key challenges? You've been deeply involved in this industry for a long time. What do you see as the challenges ahead? And I need you to unmute. There you go.
Okay.
We lost you again. Hit that mute button. There we go.
Okay. I've got 4 challenges listed. One, I talked about grazing cover crops, but we found that year to year, there's a high variability in the amount of cow days per acre. And it causes us to, in years when there's large production, we probably don't have enough cattle to cover it. And in years when it's low, we end up feeding more than we'd like. Another challenge that I think is related to climate change, we have in the last 2 or 3 years experienced a vast reduction in night winds. And night winds have been important to us in getting alfalfa baled in prime condition. When the wind doesn't blow, the number of hours we can bale after the dew sets in enough to hold leaves on the alfalfa is vastly reduced. Years ago, we could bale sometimes all night or midnight to 1 o'clock in the morning. The last 2 years, we're lucky to get past 9:30. So it's really narrowed our windows of doing a good job. Another challenge on the grazing side and managing native range, the reduction in oil prices recently and the challenges that COVID has brought to our economy, I think we're seeing a reduction in spending on controlling brush and invasive species. When producers, landowners can finance it, our neighborhood's been very aggressive in trying to improve rangeland quality. Another challenge that we have, and it's been alluded to, is pricing our forages economically into rations in a world when corn is so cheap. It was a lot easier to make forages work in the early teens when corn was high than it is today. So that's 4 challenges I see from our perspective. Thank you.
Thank you, Roger. Very, very interesting. Hadn't heard about the issue of night winds. And it's so true that in the tough economic times we're in today, that brush reduction tends to go a little bit further down on the list of immediate priorities. Appreciate that very much. Clayton, from your perspective, what are the, you see it locally as well as nationally, what are the key challenges facing the feed and forage industry today?
I feel like a real farmer on this one because I guess I'm a glass half empty because it was a lot easier to come up with issues than it was with successes, I thought. But for me, I guess the first one would be simply on the marketing side, price setting, figuring out, where alfalfa that you have, baled up ought to be sold at. It's pretty easy to get I shouldn't say easy, but if you get that high quality premium alfalfa baled up, you can get paid for that, dairy wise or whatever. But it seems like anything below that, all the other grades that we have when we list it with the pricing through USDA or KDA, out here in the Northwest, I don't know how everybody else does, but we're pretty well stuck with the grinding price. So we either get grinding price or premium, and there's really no in between very often. I mean, occasionally, but for the most part, you just get one or the other. So I mean, if we can figure out a way to, I guess, be able to market it, it's not like we can go to the elevator and just sell. It's certainly a different game with the alfalfa. And along with that, sometimes you've got the characters from out of state that may or may not always get you paid when they do pick up the alfalfa. So it's definitely a different game, getting paid on the alfalfa. Another issue, and it's kind of been talked about a little bit, and that is the rations. It seems like a lot of times nutritionists have been cutting the alfalfa out. I guess I'd like a strong push, I guess, getting the word that, hey, that alfalfa, that is a, kind of a superior feed. And, if we can justify it, get that back into ration where the nutritionists are kind of cutting it out. I was amused earlier with what AFCO, is that what he called it? The fact that they're having trouble getting alfalfa baled up with any quality. Well, I'm going to say maybe that's a little bit geography too. They have to maybe leave it out there in Iowa on the ground a lot longer with the humidity versus, out here. I feel like we can probably get a pretty good bale baled up for them if they wanted to compare ours. And then I mentioned it earlier is in the successes, and that's the water resources that we have available to us. The Ogallala Aquifer was mentioned. Here in Cheyenne County, in our groundwater district, we've been limited to 15 inches of irrigation. It does make it difficult. You got to watch the water meter. This year it was been awfully hot as we've gone along, and the first 2 cuttings it went through a lot of water. And fortunately, I did have a rain a couple of weeks ago that I guess I was able to slow down the irrigating some, but yeah, the water issue is a big concern for us out here, being able to raise alfalfa, and I'm sure any other forage or any other crop is hit the same.
Very good, Clayton. Appreciate that. Dusty, you had a long list of pluses, of successes in the industry. What do you see as the challenges, particularly from a grazing and rangeland perspective?
Yeah, I've got a lengthy list here, but the truth is that a lot of these are interconnected management issues when it comes particularly to native range. The thing that continues to top that list is overstocking. And overstocking is a result of a lot of different things. And I think the primary driver there is that we tend to rely on traditional pass down, what you should stock it at type rates. So I stock it 6 or 8 acres to the pair and so on and so forth. And I think there's several things to keep in mind if you're doing that. One, did dad or granddad or, whoever that got passed down from, I mean, what was that rooted in? What was it right to begin with? I mean, there's a question to behold in itself. Secondly, as I alluded to earlier, I think, assuming that it was right to begin with, cow size crept up over the years, making that, rate not accurate for what it once was. A second thing that's interlinked and equally as important as the overstocking is lack of fire, and we see a widespread lack of fire on native range, and that's it's pretty well all across the state. It's not a Flint Hills problem. It's not a Central Kansas problem. We even see it in the western third of the state now. Native range needs fire, period. And the data overwhelmingly shows that, and we are losing ground big time. Even in the Flint Hills, where people think of fire as a very established culture, and in many respects it is. But the data that we're seeing now is showing that even there, those areas are being threatened by woody plant invasion like never before. It's encroaching from draws and bottomland that, it's had fire run through it or run around it, but it's not burning through it, and it's not taking care of it. And so the seed source still remains. And so when it comes to fire and serious management of expanses of native rangeland, it's a game of perimeter to area ratio, effectively. So the bigger the area, or the core area that you can create that has no woody plant invasion potential within it, no seed source, the cheaper it is to manage in the long run, right? Because then you can focus your efforts around your periphery. There's, statistically, there's only so depending on the plant, there's only so far from the seed source in towards the interior of your core that seed dispersion will occur, and that band of your periphery is where you can focus your efforts. So, I think we're here in the coming years, we're going to see a movement towards landowners banding together to create cores to make it cheaper for everybody to operate against these woody invaders, and the list of those is long and distinguished. If I had to prioritize that, it'd probably go eastern red cedar, hedge or Osage orange, Siberian elm, honey locust, black locust, those certainly top the list. And you know, we can cover a pretty wide expanse east to west of where those plants top the list of problems. While on the topic of invasive plants, Old World Bluestem, Serratia lespedeza. So folks in the Flint Hills have been familiar with Serratia for a long time. Have been doing battle with it for a long time. You know, and I think it's become clear that just mass continuous applications of chemical, while certainly part of the puzzle, are not the catch-all end-all there. Otherwise, we'd have been rid of Serratia quite some time ago, I think, in that part of the state. So hopefully the incorporation of growing season burning in with chemical applications will assist in that. Old World Bluestem. Now there's a plant issue that very well may make Serratia lespedeza look like a PUD problem. One, it has similar growth pattern and physiology as our native grass, our perennial warm seasons. And so that makes it very difficult to control chemically, because there's nothing that's really selective for it. And the other issue is, to my knowledge, I think you can probably find that plant in about every county in this state. I see it pretty well everywhere I go. And so when I say Old World Bluestem, that's a collective term for Caucasian and yellow bluestem and their cultivars. You know, cultivars that were reared out of Texas and Oklahoma. And so I see that as a huge problem. I see a lot of it. It's taken over range. It's less palatable than our native warm season perennials. It's certainly less valuable for all the other benefits of rangeland use. You think about wildlife use and all that. It forms a monoculture, and monocultures just aren't good for those other uses. Plant diversity is king, right? So you know, that's a biggie, and I worry about Old World Bluestem. You know, we had down in my part of the world here over the last 5 years anyway, we've had a couple of large wildfire events, and I think you can go into those areas and you can talk to ranchers, and even ranchers that lost, you know, houses, vast amounts of livestock, you know, miles and miles of fence. You know, it hit them hard in that respect, but I think everybody looks back now and agrees that you know, fire was good for the land. It just wasn't good for some of the ways that we were operating on it, for sure. But tied to that, you know, there was a large outpouring of charity and shipments of hay, and which was a good thing. They used it. It was, but every time I saw a big old convoy of those trucks rolling through from who knows where, loaded with grass bales, I just wondered, you know, what's in that stuff. And we caution people, you know, roll that stuff out in a controlled area, keep it contained. That way we can go back and see, you know, what's there. And I encourage people to do that anytime you're shipping in grass hay in particular. I'm not talking about alfalfa here. And rolling it out on native rangeland. The lack of fire issue and the subsequent woody species invasion, I mentioned that's kind of tied to the overstocking, and it is. So somebody may be appropriately stocked for the acreage and what used to be there for, say, 640 acres of ground. But over the years with say, lack of fire and encroachment of trees, maybe you only have effectively 450 acres to graze, and if you're still stocked for 640, you know, you're overstocked. So a lot of these issues are interlinked. They're tied together. Lack of fire and overstocking. We've got to burn. You know, I work out of South Central and southwestern Kansas, so you know, the big arc of the Ark River has a massive tree invasion going on all along that basin. The Cimarron River Basin further to the south, I work in that in Comanche, Clark County, out into Seward County, where it cuts in out there. You know, we've got tree problems there. I hail from far western end of the state. You know, it's people out there, you know, I 20 years ago as a teenager, I rode a tree planter, probably too many miles, planted a lot of cedar trees, and I regret every one of them. They make good wind breaks, but let me tell you, those breaks out there along those drainages, whether you're talking about the Republican or the Forks of the Solomon River, Smoky Hill River, you know, you can compare the aerial imagery. The tree invasion's coming. And if we don't get a fire culture established out in big time anti-fire country right now, we're going to have problems. And you know, it's not too far down the road, a decade, maybe two. So we've got to get on the stick and start dropping matches in places where matches haven't been dropped in a long time.
Thank you, Dusty. Yeah, that list of invasive woody species, that's a who's who of bad guys in our territory here. So I appreciate that call to action. I'm going to ask a general question of y'all and see who would care to respond about other forages. We've rightly so talked a lot about alfalfa and native hay. What about forage, sorghum, silage? Any challenges or perspective any of you would care to share on some other elements of the feed and forage sector? Anybody want to comment about that? I might pick on Roger Black. Roger, what's your perspective on some of these other forages that are part of our feed picture as well? And I need you to unmute. There you go.
Okay, are we here?
Yeah. Roger, you're toggling that button. Try it again. There.
Okay, there.
Yep.
Two things that we are doing. I mentioned that our alfalfa is rainfall dependent. And we've learned that in the summer, when it's hot and dry, alfalfa can be grazed safely. So we have several alfalfa fields that are adjacent to native grass. And when we take the cutting off and it's really dry, we turn the cattle into the alfalfa fields, take pressure off the grass. We can get a lot of grazing days off of alfalfa that's too short to ever harvest for marketable forage. And I think that has helped our grasslands. And we have, as was mentioned with someone else, we have a Stalker program for all our calves that we raise. The plan being that if we hit a drought, those can go to town and we've protected our cows. We did a cover crop mix of cowpeas and forage sorghum and millet. We baled that, sampled it, and it was a 14% protein product, which let us winter cows with no other supplement. When we had to feed hay, we fed that, and that's all they got. That's a pretty big deal to have a cover crop mix that's high enough in protein and energy to meet the requirements of a cow herd in the wintertime. So those are, and we're playing a little bit with sheep. We have a little band of sheep out with a protective donkey, and so far the donkeys defeated the coyotes. So we're hoping that can become a part of our weed and brush suppression program.
Interesting. Maybe it was Dusty who mentioned goats as a possibility. Glad to learn about that. That's a management strategy to identify a cover crop that has some potential for high enough protein to be in the mix. Any other comments from anyone about forage sorghum or silage? I don't know what role silage plays in the dairy operations far out west, but any comments from anyone?
Yeah, when look at our diets, our forages that come up across our farm and dairies are, yeah, corn silage would make up, close to 70% of the roughage that we feed. Corn brings a lot of things that are really, really tough to replace. One of which is that it's one of our lowest ash crops that we can put up. The crop never has to touch the ground. It's extremely high NDF digestibility, but obviously it takes some water. But we also grow alfalfa for silage and bale hay. We grow triticale silage and wheat silage. Forage sorghum. Forage sorghum really can't find its way in our milk cow diets, but it works really well in young stock rations. It works well for some of our neighboring feed yards. We've got some of our dryland acres that we've put into a forage sorghum followed by either wheat for cover, or if we don't get moisture, we put it into oats that will come back and we'll high spot them a little bit to just try to make some forage and at the same time leave some good residue instead of just having an open fallow period out there. And so, so we're trying to cover the gamut on multiple forages, but and all of them have their own challenges, but at the same time, all of them have their own values that they can bring into the dairy.
Thank you, Kyle. I appreciate that. You sounds like you're managing a lot of challenging, a lot of challenging issues there, and trying to balance those out. And I appreciate that. In a minute, I'm going to ask for some questions from our participants who are joining us by Zoom. I did have a question for Clayton Janicki. You were recently appointed to the National Alfalfa and Forage Alliance Board. Clayton, could you tell us a little more about what that is, what role that plays?
Well, I got on that as a result of being on with the Kansas Forage and Grassland Council. The Kansas Forage Grassland Council has a seat on NAFA, and I guess it was January, I got a phone call saying, hey, we got somebody moving out. We'd like you to move into the spot. And a couple weeks later, I was in Washington, D.C., and we were talking to a lot of different senators and representatives, not just Kansas, but kind of everybody that's, I guess, related to the Farm Bill, trying to push for I guess more research dollars. NAFA itself is it's largely funded by memberships. You have individual memberships. Our membership in Kansas Forage and Grassland Council makes us a member in NAFA. So actually, when we pay our dues to the KFFGC, we're actually on NAFA's site. We're paying our way in. The funding for NAFA comes from memberships. As I said, we have a lot of corporate memberships, and that gives, John Deere, for instance, is one. I guess I shouldn't single anybody out, but for instance, they have a seat that they've paid for a membership, so they have a seat on NAFA. There is, I think there's 8 different categories on the board, ranging from producers like me to equipment manufacturers, seed producers, actual seed companies, breeders, university research. It's really pretty interesting. And then they have a lot of different projects that are funded research projects. And I think you can pretty well get to those on the NAFA site, nafa.org, I believe that is, or alfalfa.org. But it's I guess it's very worthwhile. I think it's something that certainly we all ought to be looking into joining in the KSFGC as well as NAFA. They push. Oh, they push for using alfalfa, the benefits of alfalfa. Right now, one of the big things that's going on is the regeneration. It seems to be a key word throughout the country with environmentalists, and that is one thing that we can really push the benefits of alfalfa as a regenerative crop. What it is able to do for our soil, put nutrients back into the ground. You know, it's a crop you plant once and hopefully get, you know, generally a minimum of around 5, but kind of depending on where you're at. And I guess what finances are dictating, you know, I've heard people leaving it a stand-in for maybe 15 years. It may not be doing the best at that point, but still it's economically viable to do that, and you're helping the ground soil profile and the environment at that point.
Well, if we're talking about regeneration in agriculture, that would certainly seem to be a win-win from a producer standpoint as well as environment and so forth. I'm going to turn to Robin Bloom. Robin, here on the Kansas Department of Agriculture staff, I think has been trying to monitor chat and questions. Robin, are there questions to share for the panelists?
Yes, we do have a couple of questions. I think this first one is geared more toward Kyle. What types of water saving steps have you incorporated into the dairy?
Yeah, thanks. And so, yeah, you know, water is a huge focus for us. We're really fortunate in a dairy that, you know, we do use water, obviously, for the livestock, processed water, but, you know, net sum, you know, our dairy, whenever you count what we're able to re-irrigate back out through our lagoon system and our wastewater, you know, we're about the equivalent of 1 circle of corn. So we, you know, just like the past 3 weeks, we've had 7 inches of rain here, and, you know, we have close to 600 acres of runoff that we capture. So we make big strides on how much water we gain back in our net pumping balance. But so, you know, reusing water multiple times for cooling the milk, washing the barn, and then obviously ultimately for irrigation are big strides. You know, out on the farm, you know, we, in our part of the world, I think all but one of our corn circles this year is really in a rotation with triticale. So it was planted back into triticale or wheat stubble. And our soil has very good potential to retain a lot of moisture, so we can go in with full profile. And if you averaged our pumping the past 5 years across our irrigated acres, we'd be between 10 and 11 inches of water that we pump across our farm, our irrigated acres. So able to maintain minimal pumping and at the same time cover our needs. And then, you know, for a dairy, you know, and this is really on our mind for the long term, is we have to be able to balance our manure nutrients back with our crop production. And as water goes down, that's a little bit more of a challenge than it was when every acre was in summer crop 20 years ago. Our winter crops don't consume as much nutrients as our summer crops largely, but high yielding triticale, and that has really worked well. It's sucking up a lot of nutrients. So thanks for the question.
Thank you, Kyle. Kyle, if you've had 7 inches of rain here in recent weeks, you must be living right. I don't know what it is.
Yeah, a little lucky. You know, we were 5 inches through the end of June, and I think we're sitting 12 or 13. So it was a real blessing. It's going to save our summer here. So,
amen to that. Robin, other questions from the chat or from Q&A?
Yes, this one could probably go to anyone. who would like to answer. But the question, a little bit of the background before the question. NASA's reported that in 2020, Kansas will harvest 530 acres of alfalfa, which is down 120 from 10 years ago and significantly less than that ultimate high that was back in 2003. In your view, or in your mind, what is I guess the question is the current number of acres enough? Do we need to be increasing that number, or what is the opinion on acreage of alfalfa in Kansas?
Who from our panel would care to address that question? Are we producing enough alfalfa? Are those numbers right? What do we need?
This is Clayton. I'll hit that a little bit, I guess, real quick. I guess the producer side of me says, hey, yeah, we're raising enough alfalfa because the more we raise, the price will go down, right? But it does seem like the price is fairly firm for alfalfa right now, and I'm sure that is a supply and demand thing. On the end user end, I don't have of the question. I probably don't have nearly as good information as maybe Kyle would have, at the dairy and finding alfalfa. But it seems like everybody I talk to, they normally get what they need. So it's not like we just don't have it, especially the fact that the other sources for feed have been coming from maybe the dry distillers or something like that mixed with the wheat straw, and that's where a lot of the alfalfa acres have gone to, and those tons just aren't being used like they were before.
Other panelists, how would you respond to that question? Are we are the NAS numbers consistent with what you're seeing, and is that enough for the state of Kansas?
Ron, this is Roger. There's some limits on alfalfa acres. There's a grain farmer that would like to grow some alfalfa faces pretty significant equipment investments. The average age of farmers in Kansas is not getting any less, and it is a fairly labor-intensive crop. And ultimately, the market price balanced with those issues, I think, is what decides what kind of crops are going to be planted. And we have limits from investment, labor, and markets. And really, that's probably what should decide what we plant. And that, I think, has put us where we are today.
Any other panelists care to respond on this question? One of you made mention that nutritionists are recommending a reduced amount of alfalfa in rations. Is that something you're seeing generally? And why is that the case? This is a question for any panelist who would care to address it.
Yeah, this is Kyle. I would, nutritionist, I think their job in our business and my degree is in nutrition. I mean, at any given point, right, capitalism rules, right? We run scenarios and we look at nutrient profiles and we balance out cost of what makes the most sense. To the point of the last question, I can promise that if we were only a farm without a dairy, we would have more alfalfa acres. There's no doubt that the budget suggests that it's a good crop to raise, which to the other side of the tune means that we tend to feed our cows with other crops as much as we can, and I would say in our mind, the only real limit to alfalfa and why we push those out, I mentioned ash earlier. Crops that we can direct cut that we never have to touch the ground that don't bring ash. That's a real deal. Now our operation is located really, really close to the Ark River, and most of our hay acres fall in the sand hills right south of the Ark River, and we can deal with significant ash levels that come with that. But I think alfalfa is an extremely, extremely viable crop, and if we weren't milking cows, we'd probably be growing more acres of it than what we are, which probably says that the value proposition's about right. Meaning, given what Roger said and Clayton said, it has equipment needs, it takes time, it's more difficult, and it should be rewarded. And I think that we see that when we run the budgets on it.
Thanks for that response. Any other comments from anyone on these topics? Robin, were there other questions to be addressed from the Zoom universe?
There was one more kind of general question, as earlier was discussed with related to alfalfa, is just wondering about ideas on how to market alfalfa versus corn.
Marketing alfalfa versus corn. There was reference to how to price the challenges when corn is so cheap, and all of these issues are so interrelated. You think about ethanol plants and dry distillers grain and how that enters into the equation. It is a tremendous balancing act. Any response to the question, marketing alfalfa as it relates to corn?
It's Clayton again. I'll try to answer that one as well. With the corn, when it's time to sell it, you call the elevator, you know what the price is going to be. And, you may not like the price necessarily, but you know what it's going to be. With alfalfa, you're going to have somebody call you, and they're going to try to work the price lower for them. You're going to try to obviously be making the best dollar you can for your product. So there's going to be a little bit of a negotiating on the price. But I guess once you figure out what that price is and that you're both happy and you're going to make that sale, the biggest thing is, boy, make sure that truck doesn't leave till you have your cash, because once it's down the road, you're going to have trouble getting paid for it if you're dealing with somebody that's a little more unscrupulous than some. I think that's probably an issue that everybody that's raised alfalfa has faced probably more than once. But yeah, it's sad that you cannot have faith in other human beings. I guess like maybe out here in Kansas that we were grown up and raised in a manner that you trust people, and you just can't do that, unfortunately, when you're selling your alfalfa. You have to be very leery of everyone.
It's a shame it has come to that, but it does seem to be that's where we are in the world today. Weston or Dusty, anything you want to add to any of these questions?
Yeah, I can't speak to corn marketing. I mean, I've marketed wheat before, and yeah, similar experiences. Alfalfa is not traded, not on the board. Different places are going to have their spot market. We have a spot price that we sell it at. But generally speaking, you're buying hay. It's you're negotiating a lot. And a lot of times when alfalfa arrives at at well, the FOB location where it's agreed upon, it doesn't even look the way you suspected or negotiated for. And I just with grains, it's so much. Things seem to be so much more predictable. But I'm speaking from someone who has very limited grain marketing experience. To me, alfalfa, it's always felt like the Wild West. And I'm sure that others would agree. But you can get into the negotiation aspect of things and get a better price. Sometimes you'll find a producer that's really good. They're bringing you stuff at a really good price, and it's 18% plus price. But relative to corn, I would say, at least for my experience with the grain, it's just this is what we're buying, this is the price, and with alfalfa, everything is up for negotiation.
It's a different process, isn't it? I have a question from Secretary Beam, actually, to present to the panelists. Dusty noted the spread of Old World bluestem to the native plant ranges. It's an interesting issue where, Old World bluestem has been used in other states and certain regions for different purposes. Secretary's question: do you think that Old World bluestem should be listed as a noxious weed? Anybody going to address that question?
Ron, this is Roger. The problem we have Old World bluestem in my neighborhood. What we do not have that I'm aware of is an effective way to manage it. Johnson grass is a invasive species. We know kind of how to manage that. Old World bluestem, I don't really know what to do. If we don't have a system to deal with it, what do we gain by listing it as an invasive species?
Anyone else care to respond on that question?
Yeah, Ron, this is Dusty, and I kind of agree with Roger. So I mean, I know this issue has been talked about, danced around. Based on the merits of the plant itself, it certainly would warrant listing because it has all those characteristics, which would classify it as a noxious weed. However, and listing as noxious weed, puts in the force of state law that goes along with the noxious, the statute. And so the only thing you gain is enforcement, and if you can't manage it, then how you can enforce it. So I think there's a lot of things to be worked on there. I'm glad to see that we're looking at not having seed come in anymore. We're not actively planting the stuff, but just what we get drifted across the state line, what comes in in hay. I find lots of it up and down roadways. The stuff is a pretty good. It's transported by vehicles very easily. You can find them in bar ditches. I find them along oil field lease roads. It's got a fluffy seed, just like our native stuff. I would imagine it gets carried in radiator fins and the like very easily. But yeah, if you can't, if you don't have an active means to manage it, then what good would attempt enforcement of a law against it? So, maybe there'll come a time when we can differentially manage it from our native range. I think there's a number of things being looked at. I mean, obviously, the best thing to do with that plant is to identify the invasion and catch it when it's still at at a individual plant basis, or in what I'll call mots of overall blue stem. In other words, it hasn't completely filled in, because the chemicals that you're looking at to manage that species, at least right now, appear to be well, glyphosate is one option. Imazapyr is the other option. Both of which will have by-kill, so they, it will have an effect on the native species that you get it on as well. I think we know from the data out of K-State that will tell us that imazapyr probably has a little bit less effect than the glyphosate does on our surrounding native species. But you're looking at several chemical treatments. There are a few papers out there regarding effect of growing season fire on overall blue stem. It's obviously not, it is not a game changer when it comes to managing that plant. That may have some merit. I've read those. They are peer-reviewed studies. I've read those. They indicate some benefit of doing that. I have some anecdotal observation myself of doing that. I think it's quite possible that the only benefit of growing season fire against that plant comes at a point when the plant has already become a serious problem, and the reason for that is because in a graze range situation, cattle tend to graze around overall blue stem and not on it, through it, and that results in these moths of overall blue stem that have a fairly significant thatch buildup. And so then when you do run fire through there, the temperature at ground level where the overall blue stem exists tends to be much higher than the surrounding areas of our native perennials. And I think that is probably where the negative effect against overall blue stem comes in. But I can say that even after doing that, several growing season fires in a row, overall blue stem still persists in those areas, although it does seem to be less dense and certainly weakened. So there may be another angle to look at it from in concert with the chemical effort. But with that plant, identifying it early before it becomes a problem is key. So anybody out there that's wondering about that, I encourage you to look the plant up online, figure out what it looks like. If you look up Caucasian blue stem, I think that Caucasian blue stem, from what I see, is by and large the one that we're most plagued with. When they're in their vegetative states, in other words, before the seed head comes up, Caucasian and yellow blue stem are very difficult to distinguish between, and frankly, it really doesn't matter. They're both equally bad. You're looking for this bright lime green vegetation. When Caucasian blue stem heads, it has a bright red seed head on it. And late June and early July, it's easily identifiable once you get an eye for it in native range. So catching it early, getting it spot sprayed is going to be key to keeping that plant at bay, in my opinion.
Thank you, Dusty. It's good education. I appreciate that, and you're doing your job well. And I appreciate Secretary Beam asking the question. It's an example of one of those questions that our policymakers face that are really really tough to address sometimes. Appreciate the question very much. You've maybe heard the phrase flying the airplane while you're trying to build it. We've asked the KDA staff to do that to a certain extent, along with Mark Nelson who supports the Kansas Forage and Feed and Forage Council. We've asked them to try to summarize, crystallize, coalesce some of the key challenges that you've identified in the course of our discussion this morning. And so they're doing this on the fly. So to their great credit, they're trying to pull out and find some common threads among the challenges that have been identified. But we're going to ask, even with that understanding, you know, that this is being done on the spot. They prepared a poll, another poll, an online poll, which I think Robin is going to put before you here in a minute, that identifies those three challenges. So now we're going to ask you all as participants to chime in on what you see as the top three challenges facing the feed and forage industry. And this is a multiple choice question. So the options are pricing alfalfa profitably. We heard about those challenges. Managing and maintaining alfalfa quality. Third option is managing our declining aquifers, the whole water issue that was raised first and foremost in our discussion. Invasive species and rangelands, we were just talking about that, woody plant species, and even some of the challenges with old world bluestem and so forth. And then managing cover crops effectively. We heard cover crops as an example of a positive, in some cases where the cover crops could be used with enough protein and energy to be a positive factor in cattle feeding, cattle management. So those are 5 options, and we invite you to participate in that poll and cast your votes as to what you see as the top challenges in the feed and forage industry. So we'll give you a few seconds to chime in on that poll online. And if there are other issues that we have not addressed, or if we missed something, if we didn't adequately capture that, please feel free to add those in the chat. So we have the poll results in, and invasive species, like it's identified as a top priority. All of these appear to be significant issues, but invasive species and rangelands came out on top, right just above managing our declining aquifers. And then we see these other issues are key as well, and they're all in range. Managing cover crops effectively, managing and maintaining alfalfa quality, and pricing alfalfa profitably. So clearly what the panelists have identified are important issues for all of our participants today. If there are there any other comments or questions from any panelists in regard to any of these issues we've covered this morning? Hearing none, then I think we can start to wrap up our discussion this morning. I really appreciate everyone's participation, both questions submitted and certainly our excellent panelists. I started my part this morning talking about the old well-equipped church van and the multiple mirrors and multiple perspectives. We've certainly heard those multiple perspectives here today. I guess the point I would make is that unlike that van, who's in the driver's seat? It's not just one person, it's all of us. And so we all have a role to play in helping this industry going forward. We greatly appreciate the Kansas Department of Agriculture for hosting the Growth Summit in these crazy times. They found a way to use technology and connect us all virtually here through this process, which actually is they've, in the course of doing this, they've designed a process where we can interact over a period of weeks in advance of the Growth Summit, and we can connect with each of us sufficiently online. And so I think that the Kansas Department of Agriculture has really found a way to make this a very positive process given the conditions that we are in. So with that, thank you to the speakers and KDA. And I'm going to ask for a call to action from Mark Nelson. Perhaps you all know Mark, who's Director of Commodities for Kansas Farm Bureau. He is the Executive Secretary and Treasurer for the Kansas Forage and Grassland Council and has been invaluable in planning, designing, and conducting this session this morning. So Mark, I'll turn the floor to you.
All right, well, hey, thank you very much. So where do we go from here? I'd like to echo Ron's earlier comments. Again, just thanking Kim Nettleton, Robin Bloom, and all the folks with KDA working behind the scenes that have pulled this together. I'd like to thank you, Ron, for the second time now, serving as our facilitator for this event, and I sure appreciate that. And I'd like to thank our panel for sharing their expertise, their perspectives, and their insights into the successes and challenges facing the Kansas feed and forage industry. But I most definitely want to thank everyone who's taken the time from their busy schedules to join this Zoom webinar today, participating, providing your input into the process of updating the feed and forage sector strategic growth document as part of the overall 2020 Ag Growth Summit. Honestly, where we go from here is going to be determined by all of us. The primary goal today was to have that broad-ranging discussion and identify those areas where we need to work. Now, once the updated document is posted online, we need to read through it. We need to talk to our neighbors, our colleagues, talk among and around our respective ag associations and organizations. We need to look at this list of challenges and ask, what can we do? Who can we partner with? What actions, what policies are needed to continue to grow the feed and forage sector in Kansas? Lastly, I'd like to echo Clayton's comments regarding the Kansas Forage and Grassland Council. I'd like to invite you to check out the council. Their website is www.ksfgc.org, and I'd ask you to consider joining. By joining the KSFGC, you'll automatically become part of a larger network of forage growers, ranchers, and grazers, because KSFGC is the state affiliate for both the American Forage and Grassland Council, which will be holding their national meeting in Wichita, Kansas in 2022, and the National Alfalfa and Forage Alliance. We've heard some really good things about that are going on in the forage industry. And I'll tell you, I am excited about the future of forages in Kansas as we all work together to meet the challenges ahead. And with that, I'll turn this back over to Ron. Thanks.
Very good, Mark. Thank you for that call to action, that invitation to join with others in helping this industry move forward. Folks, thanks to all of you for your participation. I'm going to turn the floor back over to Kim Nettleton of the Kansas Department of Agriculture staff to finish this up. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Ron. Thank you, Mark, for those wonderful words. And thank you to all the panelists that took their time out of their really busy schedule to participate today. We really appreciate it. Again, I also want to thank the audience for your participation in the Feed and Forage session today. A recording of the webinar will be posted at www.agriculture.ks.gov/summit in the next weeks. Please remember to join us for the crossover session on August 17th, 18th, and 19th, and on Thursday, August 20th, for the main Ag Growth Summit webinar, where we will hear from guest speakers and share highlights from the sector and crossover sessions. The Kansas Department of Agriculture is now accepting nominations for the first ever Agriculture Heroes Program. Since the beginning of COVID-19 pandemic, Kansas farmers, ranchers, and agribusiness have performed essential functions to keep food on the tables of people worldwide. KDA established this program as a way to recognize those agriculture industry who went above and beyond to serve those and better their community when it was needed most. You are encouraged to nominate any individual, family, or business in Kansas agriculture you feel provided a notable contribution to the agricultural industry or their community as a whole this year. The nomination period is currently open and will close on August 10th. The nomination instructions can be found at www.agriculture.ks.gov/summit. And again, I want to thank you for your participation, and please stay tuned. Our next sector section will be Ag Equipment Manufacturing and Sales Session tomorrow, July 28th at 2 p.m. To register, go to www.agriculture.ks.gov/summit. Thanks so much for participating. Have a great day.